Guys will get hot, guys will get injured, guys will fall in and out of favor, in and out of the circle of trust. Like, that's just what bullpens are.
Welcome into Northside Territory, Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm your host, Sahadev Sharma, with my co-host, Patrick Mooney. We're your Cubs beat writers at The Athletic, covering all things Cubs for you on this podcast and over at The Athletic. And there's not much positive going on with the Cubs right now. They have some good starting pitchers. Listen, we didn't even talk about this before we started recording, Patrick, but Kyle Hendricks is a great story right now. If the Cubs could win some games, we'd be talking much more about this bounce back, and it'd be a really nice, fun story because it's just another reminder of how baseball is so hard to predict. I think you and I were patient, as patient as we could be with Hendricks, and even both of us were like, okay, I think it's time. Like he's just not. He doesn't have it anymore. He's figured some things out using the curveball more. It's been really nice to watch that and fun to watch a bounce back. You never want a guy like him to be going out in some ugly fashion. So it's good that he's still showing that he's got something left. The rest of it is just, it's hard to watch beyond the starting pitching. We keep saying it. You're out there in San Francisco, Patrick. Another loss. This one, 2-1 for most of the game. Bullpen comes in, gives up 3 runs. Colton Brewer, and it becomes non-competitive very late. But it was typical stuff. It looked like it was lining up to be a 1-run brutal loss. It just ended up a 5-1 loss. But yet again, same story. Not even any. You can't even complain about runners in scoring position. They barely had anything. What was your view from the press box and then in the clubhouse?
Yeah, I think Monday night was such a gut punch loss that kind of overanalyze what was lining up as another 1-run loss until bullpen blow up just seemed unnecessary. I mean, there's another game Wednesday night, and if this pattern follows, it'll be another one-run loss, right? I mean, it's like kind of over analysis some of this stuff. I do think your take on the current events is accurate. I think Kyle Hendricks is a nice comeback story. Today, Wednesday, he reaches 10 years of Major League service time, which is just a huge milestone, particularly amongst players, of just recognizing, how hard it is to keep your spot for that long. It's kind of astounding, and we've both covered the entirety of Kyle Hendricks' career. The person you see on the mound, on the camera, is the exact same person he is away from the camera when the microphones are off. It's just very genuine, consistent, stable personality. But yeah, the team he is currently on is just not performing. And Wednesday night in San Francisco is game 181. Is game 81, the halfway point of the season. So I think Sahadev will take that as a jumping off point, an assessment of where the Cubs are at. I think we could start with the offense. I know you were kind of bullish on the offense, and I think no one saw like a worst in baseball offense for such a long stretch of period. How do you grade this group? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess I'd have to be, if I'm being generous, then I'd probably go a D, right? Like I don't I feel like I'm being generous by not saying F. Like I just don't know how you can look at what it, like Jed Hoyer sits in front of us and tells us over and over again 6th in runs scored last year. I mean, it's not like I like have been contradicting him and saying no, he's wrong. You're right. I was bullish on this offense. Game 1 in Texas, I was telling other writers, like, I really like this lineup 1 through 9. I think they're pretty deep. They have a lot of talent. There's no, like, obvious weak spot. I did not think Jan Gomes would drop off as much as he did. Obviously, Jan Gomes is no longer here. I did not think Miguel Amaya would struggle as much. They're not the main problems. That's an issue. They're not the main problems. Nico Horner struggled. Everybody, I don't even need to go through it. Sorry. Everybody has struggled at some point. Some guys are doing okay now. Nobody's coming up with the big hit on a regular basis. It's been very up and down. Nobody has carried the offense. That's the big thing. Like, there've been guys that have done fine. Overall, I believe they have a 95 weighted runs graded plus, like 20th in baseball. They're at 87 since April 27th. That's bad. That's abysmal. They had that hot stretch up until April 26th, and that was, they were 110 weighted runs graded plus up to that point. That's good. It was 6th in baseball up to that point. It's not like red hot. They kind of overperformed with runners in scoring position up to that point. They've been dreadful, like even worse. I don't even need to look it up, but it's really bad. I just don't know. I think what this season is. Like every season, I try and learn something. I try and reassess how I analyze the game. I just think you can have a good season, offensive season, without a superstar. It makes it a lot easier to avoid those slumps. It makes it a lot easier to feel like, hey, we can repeat last year's success. We have this rock in our lineup, and we've said it. I'm not saying anything new. I just think I feel more convinced. It's not like I never wrote that they needed a superstar. I thought maybe Seiya could be that superstar. We've talked about this, right, Patrick? This is something you and I have written and hammered for years now. That guy didn't emerge, and they never added him, and now it's just sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, Seiya clearly has been a disappointment. He hasn't been like bad, but look, it's year 3 of his contract. He clearly has talent, but is not the difference maker that the Cubs thought he would be. A fine player, but looks like someone who should probably be a DH, right?
Yeah.
And then the Cubs have a third baseman who maybe should be a DH, although Morel made a couple nice plays here in San Francisco and is weirdly on pace for 30 homers and like 90 RBIs, but hasn't been that dynamic offensive presence. And he's another guy, right? Year 3 in the majors. These guys who you think would be kind of reaching their prime just aren't at this current moment. And Cody Bellinger, I know I said we wouldn't go up and down, but like these are the guys that are supposed to be kind of anchoring the middle of this lineup. And once again, Bellinger, solidly above average player, a really nice fit in terms of being able to move him around between center fields and first base, but hasn't gone on one of those tears yet. And he was dragged into spring training, but he was a signature off-season target in acquisition and hasn't delivered that thump that they just desperately need. And so just this feeling that the Cubs are sort of stuck with this group, which I think adds to the frustration. And I asked Craig Counsell off to the side yesterday about this idea of being flat, and he just kind of shrugged it off and said that is like a timeless element of baseball. When you don't score runs, you look flat. But he would absolutely agree that the Cubs have not scored enough runs. That is true. That a lot of these things fall back on the offense, and I think that's a way to segue into the bullpen of like, if the bullpen had held a couple leads, one lead a month, you take away one blown save a month, it looks a little different. The Cubs don't look at this as like kind of the failure that it's been, but at the same time, the offense could have broken a lot of games open and given this bullpen some breathing room. And honestly, if everyone had stayed healthy since opening day, like the bullpen still wouldn't have been viewed as like the strength of the team, right? I mean, that still was an area where they sort of, kind of crossed their fingers and cut corners.
Eric Kratz here from FT. I'm a former athlete that really pays attention to his routine. And AG1 every morning before my workouts is something that gets my day going.
Hey, Braun here. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support, and it's backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body.
Unlike other products which only test their ingredients in isolation, AG1 tests their formula as a whole.
Ready for this stat? 97% of people in a research study felt more energy after 30 days of drinking AG1. If I had to recommend one product to support whole body health, it's AG1, and that's why FT is excited to have them as a new partner. Starting your journey with AG1 is a win. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/foul. That's drinkag1.com/FOUL. Go check it out, FT fam.
I am not the type that says you have to go out and sign a closer. You have to go out and sign this big name reliever. I don't think that solves a lot of problems. I'm not going to go back and look at all the free agents, but my guess is there would have been a lot of mistakes made if you spent big in free agency on relievers. This team needs to develop pitching and they also, develop relief pitching. They've done a really good job of developing starting pitching, and we'll get to that. But the relief pitchers haven't stayed healthy. I think it would be I don't think we'd be talking as much about the bullpen if they'd stayed healthy. Just
Correct.
Because I think Craig Counsell would have more pitchers to go to, and it would just, you'd start to see how, okay, I get why Craig Counsell is so valuable. He understands how to rest guys, how to maneuver guys, how to kind of find ways to not overuse them. And one thing I heard about when he was in Milwaukee was sometimes there'd be moments where you'd think the move was obvious, the bullpen move was obvious, and he'd go to someone and it would someone else, and it would work because he just understands his bullpens really well, his pitchers really well. He just doesn't have the horses right now. I think Colton Brewer has come up and been forced into a situation that's just not his role, and he's been fine, but he's also been used in situations he probably shouldn't be used in if you had a healthy bullpen, and he's been exposed. There's just not enough depth here. There's some developmental hiccups, I guess. Daniel Palencia didn't turn into a guy. Porter Hodge is still a little too young. He's probably you hope that he can learn from this year. Hayden Wisniewski is a guy that just hasn't performed consistently enough. He shows these flashes of there it is, that's a dominant reliever, and then it goes away, and he either walks guys or gives up the long ball. Luke Little can't lock it in and have consistent command. We can just go up and down. Jose Cuas, that's a really bad miss right there, right? You can't. Nobody's lamenting the loss of Nelson Velasquez, but just the reality of Jose Cuas is gone. He's on the Toronto Blue Jays, and he didn't impact this team in a positive way. And then there's the injuries, right? Now and Neris, of course, the big free agents signing. I get all the intangibles. I agree with all the intangibles. I do believe he has an impact that we can't measure on this group. It's not enough when he's struggling and you don't have the talent in the group to overcome it. I do think there's ways that this turns around, but they need to get healthy there, and they need some young guys. I said it in the last podcast. I'd like to see some guys called up. I don't know. I guess it's a bullpen day, Wednesday evening. We'll see how that goes. I'd like to see a little bit of some changes with regards to the bullpen. because it is the area where I think it can be most impacted by random relievers getting hot and random young guys. I don't believe that's as true with an offense unless it's an impact. Like you call up Kyle Schwarber in the middle of the season, a guy that can just thump 40 home runs with his eyes closed. That's different than you know, the guys that they'd be calling up right now as far as bats go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what it is or when it's happening, but you got to think there's got to be some sort of like shakeup moves coming here pretty soon. When you're at the halfway point, when the team is underperforming to this degree. I asked Counsell yesterday just about kind of ninth inning and how he views it, and it is pretty much a read and react type situation at this point. He'd like to get to a place where it is just one guy that you're leaning on in the ninth inning. I do think Neris will get some of those opportunities here and there, but for now, I mean, it doesn't help having a bullpen game thrown in the middle of that. But certainly, yeah, you look at the game score, the game situation, you know, the lineup, whatever pocket, I'm using the air quotes there, to match up relievers to put them in a position to be successful. So, you know, Mark Leiter Jr. believes it'll be a minimum stint on the IL. Cubs are at press pause with Yency Almonte's rehab. Julian Merriweather, I believe, through either a bullpen or whatever. He is progressing, you know, and then that kind of around the All-Star break sounds like, you know, a realistic target. But I mean, it's not like we're talking about, you know, Mariano Rivera getting healthy here, right? I mean, these are like
they're perfectly fine relievers.
Players, you know, like, you know, guys will get hot, guys will get injured, you know, guys will fall in and out of favor, in and out of the circle of trust. Like that's just what bullpens are. And then I think we can transition into what has been what should be an enormous bright spot, the rotation, but it has just been absolutely, you know, squandered here, this great run by the rotation.
I mean, it's remarkable how good the rotation has been, especially when you consider what happened on opening day.
Yes, yeah.
With Justin Steele. That was a moment where you thought, uh-oh, this is going to derail things. Like they have a good offense. They have, you know, Craig Counsell knows how to manage a bullpen. Just give him enough arms. And now your ace from last year, your Cy Young contender who looked great for however, that was almost 5 innings, if I'm remembering correctly, is out for an extended period of time. How do they survive this? And it's been really impressive. Everyone has pretty much stepped up. Kyle Hendricks, who we talked about already, struggled and has bounced back. I mean, everyone at some point has impressed. And Jameson Taillon, huge bounce back season. It's really, I think it's really important to have a veteran like that in your rotation that kind of stabilizes things. He's been that when Kyle Hendricks hasn't. Shota Imanaga, we've talked so much about him. I don't know what else to say other than a brilliant start to his career. They're giving him this 6 days rest because of this bullpen game. We'll see. I'm very curious. I think Thursday is worth kind of circling and watching and paying attention to. I've seen some people talk about, you know, you just hope that they didn't, you just said it, but you hope they didn't squander it in the sense that is the starting pitching going to regress?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, like that's I think we all kind of feel like it probably will, right? It's hard to be this, all of those guys be that good. We didn't even mention Ben Brown as far as the bullpen because he has been starting, and when he returns, whatever happens with him, I think will be really interesting to watch because he can impact either area. And I think that if you want to talk about like kind of like a big developmental win, a young player that you're like, okay, yep, this guy has an impactful role, whatever it's going to be, right? He's
Mhm.
going to be impactful and in a positive manner. You want to talk about closer of the future. I think that's a guy you can kind of be like, maybe, or is he just too good at starting that you just say like,
Yeah,
hey,
I think
this
he's too
guy's
good to like
yeah.
consider. Maybe because of the innings limits and circumstances in the second half that, assuming his neck condition doesn't worsen and he can manage that. I mean,
Yeah.
but the pitching development, there have been a lot of Javier Assad,
Oh
we
yeah, I didn't
barely
even touch.
talked about him, but has been outstanding. And I think that's an area where, the front office council staff can kind of hang their hat on as not just we evaluate things, but as ownership looks at where this is going. And I think that's kind of another kind of concluding section here that we can kind of look at of like, if you're owning this team, like, how do you evaluate the front office, the manager hire that you just signed off on, the highest paid manager in the game? Front office that underwent a very extensive multi-year rebuild. I think it's hard to look at this first half as anything other than a failure.
Say we were too positive, or there were I was probably too positive with what I came out as far as projections for this team. I thought they could win 90 plus games mainly because I thought they'd be in it at the deadline and they'd go hard to add some impactful players to kind of push them to that 90-92 range for wins. But as far as regular projections go, they were like an 83-84 win team, maybe like probably a little less than that, a lot of projections. My guess is their internal projections weren't too far off that. Just they had different things going well, right? They probably had the starting pitching lower, bullpen maybe slightly better, and offense significantly better. And that's how they got to 83 wins. They're below that projection right now, obviously, right? 6 games under 500. So they're like halfway through. Like, I think Tom Ricketts has to be from watching last year. I think he knows he has to assess this over the course of 162, right?
Yeah.
So if they end the season at 82 wins and the offense kind of turns it around, I'm not sure if he's like jumping ready to fire Jed Hoyer, because my guess is they kind of knew what they had in a sense. They were hoping to get a few more wins out of things and push for a little further, maybe add at the deadline, things like that, get a couple more wins than the projections suggested. But I don't think they're that far away from what they kind of expected. It just hasn't gone right offensively. So I know we've talked a lot about like to change, like there's a lot of talk about Jed Hoyer being on the hot seat. I think it begins in the winter, right? Like he has to nail this winter. I don't know if he's moving on from him at the end of this year. That's just my general guess. We haven't had a chance to really dig into this and see what's going on. I do get questions from people around the game, like, "Hey, do you think Jed's on the hot seat?" I don't see that, just because I think they kind of, unfortunately, I do think like maybe this was they're trying to take incremental steps instead of huge steps forward. So if they kind of, even if it's static, if they end up at like 83 wins, now if they end up at 72 wins, I mean, then does the conversation change?
I think the conversation is always changing or maybe evolving, and that it's really hard to withstand a year like this or just kind of gloss over it. I still think I largely agree with what you're saying in that whatever moves the Cubs have made, it has not jeopardized their medium to long-term future. Their books are relatively clean. They have a lot of flexibility, even though I think the prospects are largely overrated in the Cubs system and the industry as a whole. The Cubs have a group that's pretty well regarded, or at least there's depth and balance in different areas that you can point to. I think the pitching development is big, is something that pitchers always get injured, but you look at this group and how they've kind of managed it and structured it. I think that's working, and I think that's something that is much different than their previous window that you can point to as, okay, this system here is up and running. Craig Counsell, I believe in the long run, will prove to be a pretty good hire, someone who can really be an impactful presence in the organization. But I mean, if this is a last place team when we're doing like our end of season podcast, I mean, that's going to be a massive failure. And part of this, like, losing 1-run games or being kind of right there, giving ourselves a chance, like, where are the difference makers? And we know that the Yu Darvish trade was made under financial conditions imposed upon baseball operations, but Owen Casey isn't here yet, and whenever he does arrive, it's going to take a while for him to figure out how to hit in the majors. I think that 2021 trade deadline it has not come to fruition yet in terms of like the impact at the major league level. PCA is a nice player. I think he will be a long-term solution in center just because he is so good on defense, and that Jed and Counsell both really seem to be high on him. Like, doesn't really matter what you or I think, right? Or like what scouts are, or like what the offensive numbers look like right now. Like, that is a guy that both of the primary decision makers really seem to believe in. So he's going to get a super long runway. But otherwise, trading Craig Kimbrell, I mean, a all-star level closer, the guy that every contending team wants for October, has not given the Cubs much, if anything. Obviously Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, and Javi Baez are at very down moments, if not the tail ends of their careers. Like, was the right move to not invest big money in those guys, but you still have to like replace those guys. And Michael Busch looks like a good option at first base. Morel is kind of a question mark at third. I think Dansby, on balance, was a good signing. I get why they did that. I mean, he's been a Gold Glove defender, but he, like most of the other, all the other guys on the roster, needs more complementary pieces. This is a guy who is more of like a, ideally would be that 7 hitter in a really good lineup, not like the 8th hitter in a bad lineup, right? Like, things have been so when you like put all this together, it's gonna be awkward. I was talking to someone here in San Francisco who was kind of observing the dugout, and that individual just sensed it was tense, and like that's the difference than flat. I think we're not going to do the whole clubhouse chemistry stuff, but I don't totally believe it when they say like, this will make us better in the end, or like, we're going to grow from this. Like, a lot of bad teams just don't grow from it. Their season ends in September. Everyone scatters. They go golfing, hunting, fishing, and like big changes happen. And this was not how I thought the halfway point of the season would feel, like us kind of on alert for like, what are they going to do to shake things up? But it's hard to like take too many options off the table at this point.
Right. And I just think there's some pieces that just aren't fitting the way you'd want them to, especially in terms of defense, which we didn't really break down, but has been disappointing. third base and right field in particular. Like you said, they both kind of seem like DHs at the moment. And you want to give them some credit, especially Morel, who has made strides there. But but it's just like, is this team like put together properly? When you look at like the deals given to Happ and Suzuki and where Morel is playing, like you're not getting plus defense at those spots. I think Happ is obviously, he's won 2 Gold Gloves. I just don't see him as like this elite defender out there on a regular basis. So they're you have to question the way it's put together at times too, and the evaluation of it all. And I do think something needs to change. I don't know how you make it happen. I don't know how it changes, but something needs to change. There needs to be some sort of adjustment made here. And when I say that, I mean, in terms of personnel, I don't know what exactly that move is, but that's up to Jed and Carter and the rest of the front office to kind of figure that out. Yeah, sorry. You look like you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say, just bottom line here, heading into game 81, Cubs are 37-43 in last place in the National League Central, and only 4 games out of a wild card spot. It's bizarre. It is uninspiring, just kind of the state of the National League. But yeah, the Cubs are wrapping up what was supposed to be the soft spot in their schedule here in San Francisco. It's going to get harder over the next couple weeks. I think the stretch before the All-Star break it could be defining here,
right,
of what they still have left in them. And hopefully they give us something new or different to talk about soon.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, in that stretch, there's a couple bad teams, but Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, 3 of the best teams in baseball, yes, and some of the teams that you kind of look to and say, like, yeah, that's what you want to be, right? Yes. It's just like how they're built, how everything's going. It's easy to say that when you look at their records, but just the way those teams have been built, each a little differently, and you can say, like, okay, there's something you can take away and learn from that. Like, what are the Cubs missing? Our next show, we will take comments from you guys, comments and questions from the fans. We'll make sure to send out tweets to get your reactions and get your thoughts, and we can address them. It may not be too dissimilar from what we've been talking, but hey, if it's what you guys want to talk about, we'll talk about it. We'll try and go through this together and be your therapy, because this team requires everyone who covers and is a fan of it and probably is a part of it to go through a little bit of therapy and figure these things out. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. This is Northside Territory. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe, all those good things you do with podcasts. Read Patrick and my work over at The Athletic. We'll be coming at you daily. Patrick's out in San Francisco. I'll be out there in Milwaukee for the first 2, and Patrick will wrap up that series. And then the Cubs are back home for some tough games. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone. Thanks.